Conservative rebels, and I did say that I really did wonder whether Boris Johnson would have the bottle to remove the whip from all of them, including former Chancellor of the Exchequer and even Winston Churchill's grandson, but he did. He did. So far from having a majority, he now is in quite a serious minority position. And a debate going on in Parliament today, Boris Johnson's first Prime Minister's question time, and I wonder what options are now open to the Prime Minister. Well, joining me is Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Theo, tell me, how was his first PMQs?
It was a riotous occasion, Nigel. Good evening.
Good evening.
This was Boris Johnson taking the fight to Jeremy Corbyn. Indeed, Jeremy Corbyn seemed to try and play the role of the statesman, in contrast to Boris Johnson, who at one point during PMQs actually swore at the dispatch box. PMQs with Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn had become, well, quite boring, in truth. Boris Johnson livened it up. He provokes the Labour benches. Tamanjeet Desai, the Labour MP in Slough, had a moment when he was actually applauded by his Labour colleagues when he accused Boris Johnson of being racist in that Telegraph article last summer when he described Muslim women who wear the veil as being criminals and bank robbers and looking like letterboxes. Boris Johnson accused Jeremy Corbyn of dithering and delaying on his refusal to immediately back a general election. He ploughed on with his line that this legislation making its way through the House of Commons this afternoon and due to go to the House of Lords this evening is a surrender to the European Union, prepping all of his best lines, Nigel, in anticipation of a general election.
Yeah, and he did. I think Johnson, to be fair, and a lot of people said they thought basically Johnson was a bit out of his depth. It was the first time. But there was one funny line from Johnson, wasn't there?
There was. He accused Jeremy Corbyn of being, he said, he impersonated Jeremy Corbyn. He said, "Are you dithering and delaying? When do you want a general election?" "Well, I don't know." That was perhaps Boris Johnson's best line. He also, as I said, quoted the Shadow Education Secretary, Angela Rayner, who used a rude word to describe Labour's economic policy as something or bust, and used those words at the dispatch box. He then, away from, Jeremy Corbyn was speaking, while Jeremy Corbyn was speaking, accused the Labour leader of being a big girl's blouse. So it had all of the drama, Nigel, this afternoon, and then we moved on to the debate on this bill, this brought by MPs to force Boris Johnson to go back to Brussels and seek an extension until January the 31st. One of those to stand up and speak was Winston Churchill's grandson, Sir Nicholas Soames, who is no longer a Conservative MP. He was, in fact, speaking from the government benches, however, this afternoon when he announced that after 37 years as a politician, as an MP, he would not be standing at the next election.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not standing at the next election, and I am thus approaching the end of 37 years' service to this House, of which I have been proud and honoured beyond words to be a member. I'm truly very sad that it should end in this way, and it is my most fervent hope that this House will rediscover the spirit of compromise, humility and understanding that will enable us finally to push ahead with the vital work in the interests of the whole country that has inevitably had to be so sadly neglected whilst we have devoted so much time to wrestling with Brexit.
At PMQs, Boris Johnson accused Jeremy Corbyn of being like a chlorinated chicken. This was, of course, Jeremy Corbyn trying to attack Boris Johnson for signing up to a free trade deal with the American president, Donald Trump. And, of course, that well-rehearsed line from the Labour leader that this will mean importing of chlorinated washed chicken into the United Kingdom as there is a reduction in standards, consumer standards. Boris Johnson then turning on the Labour leader and saying that he looked as if he was a chlorinated chicken himself. In the moving back to the debate, talking of washing and cooking, Philip Hammond, the former Chancellor, who'd been accused by the Conservative leadership of trying in the debate of trying to put Jeremy Corbyn in office, hit back and said there was nothing worse in his mind of the Labour leader becoming Prime Minister.
The second claim that is made against us is that by supporting this bill, we are handing power to the Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, I would sooner boil my head than hand power to the Leader of the Opposition. But the purpose of this bill, most of us will have no truck with the concept of a vote of no confidence. The purpose of this bill is to instruct this government and this administration how to conduct the UK's future arrangements with the European Union. It is not an attempt to remove this government. It is certainly not an attempt to hand power to the Leader of the Opposition.
Now, at the moment, there's a row developing within the Labour shadow cabinet between Jeremy Corbyn and Sir Keir Starmer. This afternoon, Jeremy Corbyn's spokesman said that if this bill receives royal assent, that would be enough for Labour to support a general election at a vote demanded by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, 2/3 majority in the House of Commons supporting a general election. Once the bill receives royal assent, for Jeremy Corbyn's spokesman and Jeremy Corbyn, that is enough for Labour to support a general election. However, there is a huge amount of distrust from Sir Keir Starmer and other Labour frontbenchers that Boris Johnson will not adhere to the new law and go back to Brussels on October the 17th and seek that extension. And so they only want to call a general election once Boris Johnson has done exactly that and abided by the law. This was what, after an hour after what Jeremy Corbyn's spokesman said, that simply royal assent was good enough, this is what Sir Keir Starmer said at the dispatch box.
I can confirm we will not be voting with the government tonight, and we will keep our focus on the task in hand, which is to ensure that we do not leave the EU without a deal, and that requires the passing and implementation of this Act.
The key word
so we can assume then if Boris is going to call a vote tonight,
yes,
on having a general election, we can assume that most Labour MPs will say no at this stage.
Most Labour MPs will, and that's Jeremy Corbyn and Sir Keir Starmer at this stage are being united because the bill hasn't received royal assent. The problem comes if the bill receives royal assent, say on Friday evening, and whether that then triggers the Labour leader wanting to put down a motion of confidence or indicating to Number 10 Downing Street that he would be willing to support a vote on Monday to trigger a general election. That would put Jeremy Corbyn out of kilter with his other front benchers who want Boris Johnson to actually make good on his promise or on the legislation, not on his promise, I should say, on the legislation, and go and get that extension to Article 50 until January the 31st. And that's the point of difference, because people like Keir Starmer, indeed Philip Hammond, said he didn't trust Boris Johnson to make good on the law and to implement the law. He said he thought it would take litigation in the courts to force Boris Johnson to seek that extension. And so the fear is that if Boris Johnson prorogues Parliament and then dissolves Parliament for a general election, he would move the date until after October the 31st, and we would leave the European Union. Parliament would be sitting and MPs would be able to do nothing about it.
Okay, well, Theo, we're in for an epic autumn, I think. Thank you very much indeed for that resume of another hugely busy day in Parliament, and it's not over yet. So what should Boris Johnson do next? It would appear that he's going for a general election. Is that the right thing to do? I think he has no other option. The idea that he gives in to this legislation, that he humiliates himself before the European Council in Brussels, I think would be intolerable. Not just for Boris Johnson, but frankly for any British Prime Minister. And I have to say, overall, I think what is happening in Parliament is a total disgrace, a denigration of our democratic system. And it's a willful attempt to change the way Parliament works. It will destroy people's trust and faith in politics and in voting. I can't stand it. Camilla is a new caller from Beaconsfield. Camilla, what do you think Boris ought to do?
Nigel, do you know something? I am thrilled to pieces to speak to you. I really honestly am. And you've taken the words out of my mouth and what you've just said, because I feel this in my heart. Exactly what you have said, okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And Camilla, but I mean, if Boris goes for this general election, what policy should he stand on?
Nigel, may I just say my point, because you're obviously way more clever than I am.
I doubt
my
it.
points are, okay, number one, I think you're wonderful. I joined the Brexit Party the minute it happened, okay?
Right,
I got an email from...
You're a nailed-on Brexiteer, Camilla. That's fine. What should Boris do? Come on.
I got an email from Tim Scott, who's standing against Dominic Reeve, who's an absolute creep.
Yeah, I'm not... Camilla, I can't talk about individual candidates in elections.
No, fair enough. No.
And Camilla, and I've got to ask you, and you're very sweet, but I've got to ask you, time-wise, what do you want Boris to do?
I want Boris to get together with yourself and just get our country back to normal, Nigel. The way things, I do believe in Boris, bless him. You know, I think you're behind him as well, and I think together, I mean, ideally you, but I mean, I think Boris, you know, together you would work really well. But if Boris could, or somebody could have a word with Jacobs Rees-Mogg and ask him to stop lounging around. It would be helpful, but I think you will both, ideally you on your own, but if you think you can work with Boris, then that's cool.
Okay, well, so did Jacob Rees-Mogg lounging on the green benches, what did it look like?
I tell you exactly what he looked like. This is a man who professed, I know you can't talk about individuals, but this is a man who professes his Catholicism, condones abortion, be it through incest or rape.
But I know, okay, he's very religious, but so are religious people...
I don't think he is, Nigel. With all due respect to you, Nigel, you're way cleverer than I am. I do not think, and when he goes to the gates of heaven... Let him stand at the back of the queue.
I don't know, Camilla. I don't know that being a Roman Catholic means that you can't lounge around on the green benches. Camilla, thank you. And Camilla wants me to work with Boris. Will there be one or two conditions to that, I think? You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 16 minutes past 6, and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz.
A bill designed to stop the UK leaving the EU without a deal at the end of October has cleared its first hurdle in the Commons. It faces another vote by MPs within the hour. The Chancellor's promised more money to deliver Brexit and for health, education, the environment and policing in his spending.
The Union decided to make it a longer extension and we would have no choice about it. And in response to this, and by the way, this vote at 7 is a foregone conclusion. You know, the government lost the procedural motion to push this into play by 27 votes last night. They will lose it by that or more at 7 o'clock tonight. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion. Boris then calls for a general election. Where are Labour on this? Well, all over the shop. But basically what they're saying is they won't support a general election until this piece of legislation has passed. So at 7 o'clock, it'll pass its third reading. It will then immediately go to the House of Lords, where the Conservative Party will oppose this piece of legislation, and there's no guillotine on time in the House of Commons. There are something like 100 amendments that have been put down by Conservative peers and Eurosceptic crossbenchers, each of which has to be voted on. It looks at the moment, although, the House of Lords may sit for 100 continuous hours. I spoke to an 80-year-old peer this morning who told me he was combine harvesting until late last night and wasn't really looking forward to the next few days. But why is the government, if the government now wants an election and accepts the fact that it'll be defeated at 7 o'clock, why not just accept it in the House of Lords, let those readings go through in the House of Lords, get the royal assent quickly, and then Labour say they will back you in a general election. If Boris, if that's what you now want, having said you didn't want one, you now say you do want one, but it seems that what they're trying to do is filibuster it out in the House of Lords. If anybody out there can understand why they want to do that in the House of Lords, please call 0345 6060 973, because I simply don't understand it. What should Boris do? Rob says to me by text, a general election. But can the House block one? Well, tonight, it looks like the Labour Party will. He could also just accept that he's lost, I suppose, and accept the extension, but I think that would be just too humiliating. And what Keir Starmer was saying this morning is, well, Mr Johnson, if you give us a second referendum, we will support you. But again, I can't see Boris Johnson doing that. Let's go to Mike in Liverpool, who's a new caller. Hello, Mike.
Hello there, Farage. How are we, Paul?
We're fine. So what should Boris do in your view?
I think Boris should, he should give up being PM because he's not qualified for the job.
He said
He's not at all. He's a proven liar who's got no respect for his wife or his kids. And a man who's got no respect for his wife or his kids can't have any respect for the rest of the nation, can he?
Mike, I don't know. I mean, he's not the Pope. He's the Prime Minister. And
he's not the Pope, but we expect a little bit of decency, common decency out of the man who's supposed to lead our country through the most tumultuous period in British history.
Well, Lloyd George led this country through the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Passchendaele, the Kaiserspring Offensive, huge numbers of deaths. He led us through the First World War, and he was an outright...
This isn't a world war. This isn't a world war. It's a time of peace. And Europe has brought the continent and England and Britain the biggest time of peace we've ever known in history. And he's going to cause
the point I'm making is...
force us into World Trade Organization rules.
If you don't want to listen, Mike, we'll cut you off, all right? I'm making the point that Lloyd George was a proven liar and philanderer on an industrial scale. So I don't think that disqualifies you as being prime. And Mike, let me also say to you...
was Churchill.
Well, Churchill was not a philanderer that I know of, but he was certainly...
Well, he certainly was, and he was certainly a liar, and he was certainly a womanizer and an alcoholic.
Well, he was not a womanizer, and he did like a drink. There's no question about that. But, Mike, here's my point. You say Boris isn't qualified. Boris served 2 terms. Hang on. Boris did serve 2 terms as Mayor of London. He was also Foreign Secretary. Now, some say...
He was also sacked for lying twice.
Right. So, if Boris Johnson was to go, what would happen then, Mike?
What if Boris Johnson was to go? Well, obviously, Parliament would be completely in chaos.
But it is already.
I think we'd be in the same state that we're in now. We'd just have another Tory Eton boy put in power again, and the country would be led down the rabbit hole, which we're not prepared to go down because there's been no real preparations for a no-deal Brexit.
Right, so what would you like to see happen, Mike?
I would like to see a Labour government in power, but obviously we can't force a general election right now because a general election right now would cause more chaos than good. It would only lead to a no-deal Brexit. What we need is another referendum because the people have changed their mind.
So you're an anti-democrat, Mike, are you?
I'm not an anti-democrat.
You sound like it.
The problem is that you and your friends lied to the British people on a mass scale.
All right. Well, like Tony Blair telling us there were weapons of mass destruction that could melt us to bits in 45 minutes.
You used Cambridge Analytica.
Oh, Mike, I will not listen.
To lie to the British people.
I will not listen to his... Tell me it was the Russians, Mike. What did the Russians do, Mike? Tell me that.
It wasn't the Russians.
Really? Oh, God, that makes a change.
It was people
that makes a
like
change.
you.
And did we hypnotise the public as well?
Bots to actually convince people to vote against
you are talking. You are talking... utter rot. And I'll tell you what, you've made your point, and I'm bored with you because there are lots of other people out there that clearly are better people than you. Go on, off you go. Get rid of Mike for me. Let's go to Jamie in Southampton. Dear oh God, Jamie.
Hello, Nigel.
Good evening, new caller. Now, if you want to scream and shout, I suppose you can. But what do you think Boris Johnson should do in this situation?
My opinion is his back is against the wall. He's having his authority cut away from him at every possible angle. I mean, it does not matter what happens in Parliament, they will find a way to dismiss it. And, they calling the election would have, cut the power away from the Ramonas and everything else. I just feel at the moment, if he was to come out tomorrow morning and offer a debate or a second referendum of sorts, not something to undermine the first referendum, because I agree with the first referendum,
right?
And I agree that the people have spoken and we should leave. But the problem we have is we are going nowhere fast. And
so, would a second referendum that asked should we leave on WTO terms or the withdrawal agreement? Is that the sort of thing you're suggesting?
Yes, I'm suggesting we have a second referendum that poses a question that does not undermine the first vote.
And what would happen, Jamie? What would happen? Yeah. Let's say we had that referendum, right? And let's say that, and all the politicians would say, maybe we respect the result, and the country votes overwhelmingly to leave on WTO terms, but then Parliament might just refuse to accept it.
Then I don't know.
That's what's happening now, isn't it?
What is the answer to that? What is the answer to that? There is no answer to it. I mean, I remember, I don't know which politician it was, or just after the referendum, when the people decided to leave, on the radio he said, "We will never leave the EU. This will be just pushed into the long grass. We will create total confusion, and in the end, people will end up saying, let's just stay." And
do you know, that is what they're trying to do. Yep. That, Jamie, we had some callers last night who said they're so fed up with it, they've almost given up. And that, of course, in many ways is what some of the Remainers want. Jamie, thank you very much indeed for your call. An anonymous texter says, surely we've got to back Boris rather than split the vote and let Labour in. If that happens, we'll never get Brexit. Well, remember, it's the Tory party that have failed to deliver us Brexit. They've been in power since 2016. They have failed spectacularly. I think Boris has got no choice now. I think if he sticks to the line, that he can go back to Brussels at some point, namely the summit, really the key time of the 17th or 18th of October, and that he can get a tweak to the backstop and somehow the withdrawal agreement is going to be the right place for the country to be, he's wrong. And we saw yesterday, we saw Steve Baker, the head of the ERG now, saying that will be unacceptable to him in every way. I think Boris, the only way out of this, I think, is if Boris decides, right, we've got to leave with a clean break Brexit. And at some point in the next month or two, there will be a general election. Of that there's no doubt. If he goes on that line, and if he gets the support, non-aggression pact or whatever it is from people like me, I think he'll win the election, get a big majority, and that is the only way I can see out of this crisis at the moment. And it is a deepening crisis, and I think the public are increasingly disgusted with the way our politicians are behaving. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:30 in time for the news. Willie Aziz.
MPs.
What did Boris do to get out of this mess? Well, James has a suggestion by text. He says Boris should just ignore Parliament, extend the prorogue until the 1st of November. They'll be outraged, but what would they do? Demand an election? That's a pretty incendiary suggestion, James. I don't think he'll do it. It must at some point have crossed his mind, but I don't think he will do it. I'm being asked, Mary says, another election. God, please help us. Oh, no, not another one. And some people indeed will say that, but I can't see any other way out of this. Peter on Facebook says to me, Boris is the PM. He only inherited this. Back him. Well, he did actually help to create it because he did join the Leave campaign and play a really big part in it. Peter, I want to back him. I want to back the Prime Minister. But if he wants to take us down the route of reheating Mrs May's appalling deal, the worst deal in history, which really would do no more than take us out of the European Union in name, would leave us subject to all the laws of the European Union with no say whatsoever, and probably stuck inside a customs union forever, forget it. I'm not going to back that. If he goes for a clean break Brexit, I certainly would, and I think, to be honest, many in the country would, and I think he would win a general election on that basis with a very, very good majority. Len in Loughton is a new caller. Good evening, Len.
Good evening, Nigel. I voted to leave, but now I've changed my mind, and I think the government should revoke Article 50. We stop it, and it goes back to the people.
You revoke Article... So don't bother to ask the people. Just cancel the whole thing. Pretend it never happened.
No, cancel the whole thing and then go back to the people, because we're more informed now as to what's, the lies are and the deception. So, people have got to realise that people in Westminster, they're in a bubble, and this is having a profound effect on ordinary working people and people up and down the country, because we don't know what's happening. We don't know if food prices are going to go up, as they said.
Or down, Len.
Well, yeah. Okay,
or down. At
the moment, we're being fed everything is going to be a catastrophe.
Len, if we leave on WTO terms, if we leave with a clean break, if we leave with no deal, choose your terminology, we could reduce food prices substantially by cutting tariffs on food that comes in from all over the world. Now, some of our farmers might scream, but we could do that. Len, are you suggesting? So you're suggesting we cancel the whole thing, but then have another referendum? Yeah.
Absolutely. Because, Nigel, I voted to come out, but I didn't vote to come out without a deal. I naturally assumed that the people within Westminster would have the intelligence to negotiate a satisfactory deal for us, but it's not happening. So
they didn't ask for a free trade deal. But Len, you didn't vote for a deal, did you?
Then why is the focus on deal or no deal then?
Because that's where we are right now. Len, you know, the interesting thing about this is that if there was a second referendum, I think the result would be an even bigger vote to leave. What would happen then? Would Parliament then just ignore us again?
No, because at least we know we will be fully informed. We wasn't fully informed.
You will never be
facts at the beginning, Nigel.
Len, you can never be fully informed because one man's fact is another man's lie, and that is politics at every single election that has been fought since the dawn of time. What would your question be for the next referendum, Len?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it. Hopefully, if Article 50 was revoked, then it'd give us a good deal of time to think about it.
But
because at the moment it's just a state of flux in this country, and surely don't these MPs care how ordinary people, I won't say ordinary, people up and down the country feel that are not in the Westminster bubble?
Well, I think actually...
it's like a doomsday scenario that we're being fed every single day, and you're telling me that it's not true.
I'm telling you that the political class are doing their utmost to stop the greatest democratic exercise in the history of this nation, Len, and I'm absolutely furious about it. Len? You want Article 50 revoked? I don't agree. I don't agree, Len, but hey, you've made your point. Let's go to Henry in Fulham, a new caller. Hi, Henry.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
Good evening. I'm fine. Come on, put yourself, Henry, in Boris's shoes. What should he do?
But unfortunately, what he should do and what he's going to do are two different things. I don't think that he's got much of a choice other than to accept the deal on the table at the moment that Theresa May has negotiated. And I'll tell you why that is, because not only is he representing the people, he's also representing his party, and that's the other thing which nobody taken into account for. He's got to try and rescue his party, and if he goes out, I want to go out without a deal, but if he does go out without a deal, he's going to upset probably a higher percentage of his party than if he accepted Theresa May.
Well, he's just sacked. He's just sacked 21 of them.
Yes, indeed so. But he can't sack 100 of them.
Well, actually, Henry, he can, and I'll tell you how. Because what he said is that if in the House of Lords, Conservative peers go against his wishes, he'll take the whip away from them. So we could see a very large number of Tory peers have the whip removed. I'm not saying it'll be 100, but it'll be a lot more than 21. All right. So, but Henry, here's the problem, right? If he now goes back to Brussels, he's now going to get nothing. Whatever they might have given him a few days ago, he's now going to get nothing. So if he brings back the withdrawal agreement to the House of Commons, he will not get it through.
The problem is with the situation is, and as I said, I'm on your side. I actually want a hard Brexit and just get rid of it. I think we'll be better off long term. Short term, I think we'll be in a bit of trouble, but long term, I think we'll be better off outside the EU. Having said all of that, he's in a very difficult position because the second vote will go through. They'll force him to go back to Brussels on the table. And if he calls an election, I think he's going to be in quite a lot of trouble. I think that he'll lose. I think that the Conservative Party are in danger of losing more of their MPs to your party than Labour are. And that's where it brings back to my point. He is looking after his party just as much as he's looking after the country.
Well, Henry, it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that if a general election was held, and it will be at some point before the end of the year, and if on the one side Boris was saying we're leaving with a clean break Brexit, and on the other side was the Labour Party saying we're going to have a second referendum, and whatever parties are with Boris or with Labour, we effectively have a Brexit referendum in every sense, I think Boris will win a majority, don't you?
Do you know what? I wish I could agree with you. I'd like to think so, but I personally think that the mood of the country is. Do you know what? This whole thing has been a total and utter pain in the backside, and all I want to do is just get on with my life. And I suspect you'd probably find that there'd be more people that think, do you know what? I can't be bothered with it. Let's just stay in. And I think there's more people like that than you possibly than possibly you imagine. I mean, I speak to a lot of people. Intelligent people, a lot of more walks of life, and everybody is bored with it. And I think you'll find if there was another referendum, a lot of people think, do you know what, just stay in because I can't be bothered with it. Well, and I genuinely believe that.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is, Brexit fatigue can go one of two ways. People either say, the hell with it, let's just stay, or the hell with it, let's just leave. And it's very, very tough to read. Henry, great call. Thank you. Now on YouTube, we've got a huge number of people watching us on YouTube. And Anglo's one of them, saying, do you really think Boris can get no deal back on the table with a majority in the Commons? Nope. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's no way the House of Commons want us to be independent of the institutions of the European Union. They just don't. They don't think we're big enough or strong enough to survive on our own. That's their point of view. It's not mine. The only way that you get a clean break Brexit is to win a general election with a majority. And it is, folks, from a Leaver's perspective, it is, I think, the only way out of this. Because if in the unlikely event that he did get the withdrawal agreement, that new European treaty, if he did get that passed, that wouldn't help the Conservative Party, because 18 months down the road, they'd be more bitterly divided than they even are today, when people realised the full consequences of just how bad that is. Paul on Facebook says, what deal do the Remain MPs want as they refuse the only deal on the table? Paul, they want a second referendum and they want us to remain. It's as simple as that. They have never respected the vote in 2016, and that's why the country's in the mess that it's in. We've had no losers' consent, without which civilised democracy cannot function and cannot work. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:45 and time for the news headlines. Lisa Aziz.
A bill designed to stop the UK leaving the EU without a deal at the end of October has cleared its first hurdle in the Commons. It faces another vote shortly. Labour's dismissed the Chancellor's spending review as grubby electioneering after he promised extra funding for delivering Brexit and widespread public...
Never ever leave. We'd be stuck in the customs union forever, unable to do our own thing, because this deal is the wrong deal. Now, Henrietta, if we talked about a free trade agreement, which is where we should have started, that's different, but that's not on the table for the next 57 days. Frank is praising Boris and saying he's gone up on my estimation. Despite the loss last night, he showed more spine than his predecessors. I respect him for that. And Frank, actually, I did say last night, I was off air, I doubted he'd do it, but he showed real courage in getting rid of 21 Remainers, and that does show some sense of purpose. What should he do? Phil in Potter's Bar is up next. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I am, well, looking on with incredulity at a once great parliamentary democracy being traduced.
So let me tell you what needs to happen. Actually, we've spoken before, but I'll be honest, my view has moved on slightly since we last spoke. So right. I think Parliament is doing its job. And the problem Parliament has got is it's split in the same way that I think the electorate are, between broadly three options: Remain, no deal, and something in the middle, which is as yet sort of a bit undefined. Clearly not Theresa May's deal. And the Parliament is split in the same way. So I think where we need to go with this is, I think a general election is the last thing we need. I can think of very few things which could make it any worse. It's going to be clouded by, Remain alliance, Brexit, stealing votes from the Tories. I mean, I'm a Remainer and a Tory, and I would be truly conflicted.
Can I just ask you, as a Remainer and a Tory, you've just seen the entire Remain wing of your parliamentary party kicked out. Are you, as a Remainer Tory, still going to vote Tory?
Well, it depends, right? And this is why I don't think a general election helps. So let me explain a little bit further. The big problem we have right now, and you've mentioned it before, is there's no losers' consent. That's why we are where we are. Yes, that is a real issue. Now, It is. Now, I think there's a hard rump in either camp. You have the we will walk over hot coals, till hell freezes over, we want to stay, which is, the Anna Soubries of this world. And then we have people such as yourself who are in a similar position, but, leave. I love the way you've rebranded crashing out without a deal.
Clean break Brexit. Absolutely.
I like it. Well done. You're a marketeer at heart, Nigel. Well done. So where was I? So we're stuck. We're stuck completely. A general election is going to cause a nightmare. We have to go back to the people. So I'm not a bad loser, Nigel. In life, I lose, I win. I'm happy to
Phil,
lose.
what are you going to ask the people? What are you going to ask them?
With the current situation, and this is why I'm unhappy. I do not believe there is a mandate from the public for no deal. I don't think there is. And I'm going to be really generous.
Brexit,
there was a guy earlier. Hang on. There was a guy earlier who was a bit rude and shouted, and he talked about.
You're being too reasonable, Phil. You really are.
He wasn't very nice, and he was sort of claiming, it's all lies and Cambridge Analytica. Let me be generous and say, for the option to leave at the last referendum, there was a lack of clarity about exactly what leave meant.
And what about Remain, Phil? Hang on.
I think Remain was quite clear.
Should Remain have said fully stay in the European army, join the euro? Is that what Remain?
No, but hang on a second, Nigel. Hang on. How long has the euro been around for? We haven't joined it yet. Why do we have to use it?
But the European army is being built. The European army is being built right now.
We have a veto on things like that, Nigel.
Effectively, Phil, you can't veto everything. So if you want to veto everything, you may as well leave anyway.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think ultimately where Europe needs to go is, which it already is really, is two tiers. You have an inner federalised, closely political integration, and then you have a tier around the outside who is much more of a trading relationship.
So the point I'm making is that Remain is not a static thing. Far from it. What question, Phil? If you want a second referendum, what question would you like to ask?
It's very simple. Remain or no deal. Don't bother with anything in the middle. Keep it clear.
Well, what? Okay, all right, Phil. All right, I'll tell you what. I'll compromise. I'll compromise with you. United States of Europe or no deal.
Well, for now, I'd take the United States of Europe on the basis.
Right, fine. Okay, fine. Phil, that's great. And you would get, I don't know, 12% of the referendum, and Leave would get 70% of the referendum, with the rest maybe not making up their minds. Phil, you cannot. You have to implement the result of the first referendum before you have another referendum if democracy in this country is to mean anything.
52% voted for no deal, because I don't.
We voted to leave.
But what does that
Full
mean,
stop.
Nigel?
Full stop. It means not having the European Court of Justice telling us what we can and can't do. It means making our own laws. It means having our own borders.
Deal, yeah.
I mean, come on. You know what Leave means.
No, it didn't. No, people don't. I think now there is clarity, but back then, did anyone ever talk about the Irish backstop back at the referendum?
Because it hadn't been invented, and it was brilliantly invented by Barnier.
No one talked about that.
No, I know, and Phil, I have to say that the real winner of Brexit is Michel Barnier, because he is utterly brilliant. He managed to invent a question to which he knew nobody could find a direct answer. He called it the Irish backstop, and we're in the mess we're in. Phil, I'm going to love you and leave you. Please do call back again. Mike is calling from Chailey and is a new caller. Good evening.
Yeah, well, I was and always have been a leaver, but I've just been watching this mess unfold, and I think that the problem is Europe full stop. Now, instead of us all arguing about the decision, I think there's some floaters in Parliament who could go either way eventually. Why don't we let Boris put something to the Europeans by the 17th and have this vote the day after? And then if they've had a genuine proposal from this Parliament, everyone can see what the Europeans are really like.
Okay, I've got the suggestion. I'm going to go. Theo Usherwood is back. Theo, what's the update?
Right, we are going to get, within the next few moments, Nigel, the start of a series of votes on amendments. This is at committee stage, including, your listeners will be delighted to know, Nigel, including proposals from the Labour MP Stephen Kinnock, who's very worried about the Brexit Party in his constituency in Aberavon, who would now like the meaningful vote for on Theresa May's withdrawal agreement to come back before the House of Commons. so that he could vote for it because he's worried about a no-deal
Couldn't
Brexit.
make this stuff up, really, could
Rory Stewart's also asking to see, is putting down an amendment. He wants the withdrawal agreement to come back. But in fairness to Rory Stewart, the former International Development Secretary, he did vote for it 3 times previously, whereas Stephen Kinnock and others like Lisa Nandy, Gareth Snell, didn't vote for it, but they're now desperate for Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. So that's what to look out for initially with the committee stage votes, which will take place between 7 and 8 o'clock. And then we go into third reading, which is just a formality given what happened earlier at second reading. We're expecting it to pass. Big question marks still over Caroline Spelman, the former Environment Secretary, whether she's going to have the whip removed from her today. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson was just been at the 1922 Committee of Conservative MPs, and he drew a lot of criticism from people like Damien Green about his decision to remove the whip from Nicholas Soames, Ken Clarke, Philip Hammond and others, where Daniel Kaczynski, the Conservative MP up in Shrewsbury, when he actually tried to defend Mr Johnson's decision, he was heavily criticised by his colleagues in the room. Mr Johnson was asked whether Dominic Cummings was behind the decision and was running the decision, to which he reportedly replied that it was actually him just wearing a latex mask of Mr Cummings' face.
And are we going to... I've got 20 seconds left, Theo. Is there going to be a vote tonight on a general election?
In all likelihood, there will be a vote tonight on a general election, but Jeremy Corbyn isn't going to support it, and therefore it will not go through, and we will not have a general election.
Theo, thank you. I'll be back tomorrow at 6. Goodness knows where we'll be by then. At 10 o'clock, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now, for 3 hours of fun, it's Ian Dale.
Nigel, thank you.